Today on It's Just AuDHD, we're talking about why are the holidays so hard? From social expectations to sensory overwhelm, have you ever felt totally drained by holiday gatherings or anxious about gift giving? If you have, you're not alone. Welcome to It's Just AuDHD. We're two curious ADHD coaches, and we're going deep on the how, the why, and the strategies to get through the difficult moments and how to make the best of life with ADHD. I'm John, and I've got an adult diagnosis of ADHD.
And I'm Tarah, and I have a late in life ADHD diagnosis and an even later autism diagnosis. We're going to be diving headfirst into the messy and often complicated research around ADHD and autism. And we're bringing you along for the journey as we break it all down and make sense of everything.
Because sometimes it's just life.
And sometimes it's just ADHD. Welcome back, listeners. For today's episode, we have a very special, very festive topic, and it's why are the holidays so hard? Why do they suck so much for us?
Tarah, why are the holidays so hard?
This is probably a bit of a taboo topic. I think you hear a lot in media about like the holiday season is wonderful. It brings family together. You create memories for a lifetime. And I think that actually makes it harder in some ways because there are very distinct reasons why someone with ADHD and or autism would have a hard time. But then you sound like a total Grinch if you're like, I get stressed for the holidays. I don't like them.
I've also heard that for some people, the holidays are depressing or,
Yeah.
right? It's like there's that side of it as well on top of the stress.
Absolutely. And so today we're going to talk about why that's the case and what you can do about it. So let's jump right in. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. It is not intended to replace professional medical care. We are not doctors. We don't claim to be. We are just a couple of nerds who find this information and this research really fascinating and we want to discuss it, but please keep your medical decisions between you and your doctor and keep us out of it. All right, let's begin. And so kind of bringing it back to the holiday episode, when you're home for the holidays with your emotionally dysregulated family and you yourself are emotionally dysregulated, it's going to be challenging.
Especially if you've got parents that don't know that they have ADHD or autism and maybe don't want to accept it or talk about it. And you do want to accept it and talk about it, it can create a conflict, especially if the way they've managed their symptoms is through an amount of structure or discipline that is maladaptive or
Absolutely.
potentially harmful, right?
Yeah, I think it's very common for everyone to probably earlier in life develop maladaptive mechanisms to deal with all this stuff. And if you don't ever have intervention in the form of a doctor or a coach or a therapist or something, then you're going to stick with that. And so that can be challenging to have someone try and like thrust their maladaptive coping and expectations onto you.
Do you have a story you can share? Do you have a time that it's been hard in the holiday season?
I think maybe this is a good segue into our next subject, how to behave when receiving gifts. That has always been really challenging for me because I don't know, like I just feel uncomfortable when I'm like opening presents. And I think it's because there is so much expectation for how to appear sufficiently grateful because it is nice. Someone has gotten a gift for you. They've gone out of their way to like think about you. And it kind of feels crappy if you don't react in the appropriate way.
It's
But
like you have to look happy, but if you look too happy, you look like you're being sarcastic.
yeah.
But if you're not happy enough, then you look disappointed.
Right. And I'm not tremendously expressive with like joyous emotions. Like I'm never the person that would go out and like be like woo and like scream. I don't know. Like I'm not the most excitable
I
person.
don't think that's a notable trait for people with autism to begin with.
No. We tend to have a bit more of a flat affect. And I don't know that you hear it as much when I'm speaking on a podcast, right? But like when I'm just like at home, particularly when I'm talking to other people, like my partner who's also autistic, talking to him, and he's more like predominantly autism, right? It's pretty flat. Like we don't our voices don't change as much. Like my voice is very fluid depending on who I'm talking to. It's kind of fascinating. And so for the holidays, there is this script that it feels like you're supposed to follow, and it's hard, and I feel uncomfortable. There's also a concept with autism, which is like the you don't like being perceived. It's autism can feel like you're always sort of being watched even if you're not, and it's unsettling. And so when people actually are watching you and waiting for your expression, and they're excited, they're emotionally invested in how you're going to react, it's a lot. And I just don't, yeah, I don't know how to like if I were to be able to take the present and like go sit in bed and like open it up all by myself, it would feel good. And so that's how I distinguish. Some people are like, maybe you feel like you don't deserve the present, or maybe, and it's not that, because I would feel totally fine and normal if I was opening it up all by myself. And even then, I think there's a little bit of stress there because I get so stressed about like, if I were to open it by myself, do I need to send them a thank you note? What do I put in that thank you note? That's another task. Like,
Yeah.
it's a social contract that is inextricably two-sided, and I don't always feel like I can uphold my end of the contract.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I thought about this a little bit because I didn't really like gift giving. I don't like gifts. I don't like giving gifts. I don't like having to think about it. I don't like
Yeah.
getting gifts. Gifts are objects and it's material, and I don't want to be so. I don't like the idea of being so consumerist. The reality of it is, like, I am consumerist. I love having things, but I love having specific things that I like. And so it is like all the stress around giving and getting things that you didn't ask for, don't know how to react to.
Yeah.
And so to your point about it, like the thoughtfulness, I feel like whenever the gift is something that is thoughtful or handmade or intentional or comes from a previous conversation, that's whenever it's easier. Like it feels more natural because it comes from the heart. It comes from the relationship rather than it just being like a random thing because of the season, which has always felt weird.
Well, it's kind of nice to be able to have a talking point as well. Like if it's homemade, you can be like, "Wow, how did you make this?
Yeah.
How long did this take you?" Or if it's something where they maybe there's utility to it, you can say, "Oh, great, I can use this when I do blah." And so it kind of feels
Uh-huh.
like the script there is easier compared to just
Yeah.
like a gift. And you're like, this is cool. I don't know what to say. Thank you."
Right, right, right. Especially if it feels random, right?
How do you react to gifts?
Yeah, I think it depends on where it's coming from. I think I've gotten to a point, probably because of all of that, telling people over the years I don't want gifts and don't uh, care about gifts. Um, we just don't even do them in my family, really. It's like we'll do things for each other. Like my wife and I will do vacations, so we'll pay for like a hotel or pay for the flight or whatever, and then we'll get stuff for the kids, and that's always fun. We don't really do stuff for each other as much, or stuff that we know we'll ask for, and then we'll get the thing that we're asking for. And that's kind of how we did it in my family too. Was like, okay, what do you want? Here's a gift card. Not even a gift card, but here's the money for what you want, or just tell me what you want, and I'll go get that thing. And so it's like, okay, cool. That's what I wanted. So it takes the surprise element
Yeah.
out of it. But then there's times where it's like I've been in social situations, like with family. I got a tire repair kit. And it's just one of those things like it's like they saw it somewhere like Walmart or whatever, and they're checking out like, how to get something. Um,
They
and
want you to be safe, of course.
they want you to be safe, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, cool, thanks. Sure, I'll hold on. Yeah, it's like, how, yeah, how do you do that? But I like your point about having a segue, having some way to comment on the utility of it.
Yeah. I like experiential gifts. I so for several reasons. I will just sit on like Airbnb or Groupon or one of those sites where they sell experiences. And it's great because first of all, ADHD, you can get it same day. instantly. It takes 5 minutes and a credit card. So if you feel like I still don't know what to get this person, or like, oh crap, they got me a lot more, or because that's part of the social contract too, is there's sort of this high level expectation of like equality in terms of, or maybe it's like proportional equality, or eh, there are sort of expectations there, right? So you can pad with experiential gifts or just procrastinate. And it's still fun, and it's still sort of a conversation topic as well. Like, because you can later on kind of bond over and go, hey, did you ever go to that welding class that I bought you? How did you like it?
Yeah.
So it creates like a discussion point for later. It doesn't create clutter because, to your
Yeah.
point, there's a point in adulthood where you're like, I have purchased the things that I need. I'm not going to wait 2 months if I need a new air fryer. Like, I'm
Exactly.
just going to go get that air fryer.
I really
And so,
like,
and it's hard to then buy for other adults.
right. I like that note about experiential gifts because one thing I think that ADHD and autism bring with it is the love of planning. And so it's like when it's something that when it is an activity, then you get to plan the event, and that in itself can be a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the perfect gift for ADHDers to give other people.
We've been talking about gift giving, and there's a
Which is
couple of
only one small part of the holidays.
only one small part. In addition to that, there's managing social expectations, handling routine change, setting boundaries for overwhelm, and all of the sensory overload that comes with that. Now, managing social expectations can be tough, so I think it's important to give yourself permission to take a break. You don't have to be on the whole time. Setting boundaries is important. And if large gatherings are draining, then limit time and then plan an exit strategy so you don't feel trapped.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like we talked about, the gift giving is itself a social expectation. But realistically, the holiday season is not just that brief moment. It's at minimum probably the full day, but also generally like a full weekend or a full week with your family, with sometimes extended family that you might not be comfortable with. And they all probably come with their own quirks because oftentimes these things are hereditary. So it's generally a room full of people with their own flavors of neurodivergence that can frankly clash with yours. And so I think putting all those people under the same roof creates a bit of a tinderbox to some extent, and it can be very volatile.
Well, not only that, but just managing social expectations in any setting. I think family is one side, and what's hard is sometimes people will only check in or expected to see people you don't see very often that might have their own baggage, kind of like what you're saying. But then there's also social expectations like events, parties, and social gatherings like that. It's really important in this. I think it's where like planning the exit strategy comes into play, knowing who you can talk to about basically have an ally in the room, or just knowing that there's a quiet space to get away so that you're not sort of trapped in a loud, overwhelming, overstimulating environment, and you can take breaks as you need it. So you can still have fun, you can still go to the event and see people, but it doesn't have to dominate the entire situation or your entire, I don't know how else to say that.
No, I really wish that I had that tip growing up because we didn't necessarily go see my dad's side of the family for Christmas, but we saw him for Thanksgiving. And so he is one of 7 children that my grandma had, and then each of them had 3 children, except for me. I was the only child. And some of them had great grandchildren, right? So very, very full house with children. So a very noisy, kind of unpredictable environment. And they, by and large, lived in Nebraska and I lived in Colorado. And so they all knew each other better, didn't necessarily see them all the time. And it would just be so uncomfortable because it's like, I didn't know what to ask them. Like I didn't know what questions to ask them because I didn't know enough
Yeah.
about their lives. They didn't know what questions to ask me. And they frankly were closer with each other, right? So it was just always such a challenging situation. And I always appreciated the couple of relatives that would come and ask me more questions. And give me, I guess for lack of a better term, a script to follow almost. Like, be like, oh, how are you doing in school? But I'm like, okay, thank God there's something to talk about. But I didn't know that I had the permission to take a break, right? And so you just sort of sit and simmer in that for days at a time,
Yeah.
just feeling the anxiety of like, I know I'm supposed to be engaging with people, but I don't know how to go about it.
Yeah. Well, and what's tough too is the awkwardness that comes with social gatherings when you, especially when you feel the pressure to be at like a holiday party, or doing something with friends, or especially when it's a work gathering. Those can be so awkward, and you kind of feel like you gotta be there, and they can be kind of clicky, right? Sometimes there's a couple of people that are hitting it off better, and if you don't have somebody that you can rely on, or somebody that you can know is a safe person in the room that you can talk to, it might feel a little bit you might feel a little bit ostracized in
Well,
those
and
in
this
those
is
settings.
maybe a hot take. I almost think it's worse if the people are really nice. Because if they're nice and friendly and stuff and they're trying, but you just maybe feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, it almost feels like you put the blame on yourself. Like you're like, why am I so awkward? Why is this so uncomfortable? I'm
Yeah,
be
yeah,
the common denominator. Yeah, like it's like almost more challenging than if you have the crazy uncle.
totally.
That's just Uncle Lou, and he's always like that. It's worse when they're nice, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, what something that my wife and I do now, and if we have like if we're going to see family, or if we're going to a holiday party, or if we just went out for the evening, sometimes we'll game plan together and say, okay, there's a couple of people we know we want to see, and then we have a timeline in which we want to be able to leave, and then we kind of have cues for each other. That way we can like go and still try to have a good time, but we can set expectations about when we want to start preparing to leave and when we want to go. That way we can still see the people we want to see, but kind of cap it and have a limit. And then we know that together we're gonna stay for a certain amount of time and then go. So it's easier, a little bit easier to manage that conversation and manage that exit.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of pre-planning. Speaking of pre-planning, another thing that you could do that like is just now occurring to me, they have those like decks of cards with prompts to like get to know someone better. That it's usually like
Yeah,
questions to
yeah.
ask a partner, or questions to ask a friend or whatever. But I feel like that would totally work for family gatherings too. Like you could, if you had a deck of cards in your pocket or something, and be like, hey, if you were a superhero, what superpower would you want? And just go ask your family members. It gives you something to talk about. And I feel like that's not super awkward. I don't
Well,
know.
I love that. I love that because you're gamifying the experience, right? You're bringing something to it that it makes it feel natural or less weird, because you're just like, oh, it actually isn't that weird to pull out a deck of cards and say, hey, I've got some questions, or do you want to play a game? It gives you an entry point and a kind of like a preset thing to do, an activity to take
And
some of
if you
that
don't
pressure
need it, you
off.
don't need it.
Yeah, I want to talk about routine change a little bit.
Mhm.
Routine changes can be hard, especially with ADHD. And I can imagine with autism as well, because there's the nice thing about being at home or in familiar environments throughout most of the year is that you can control your environment to some degree. You can design your day to be like the least friction kind of day as possible. Things will always happen, but routine is a big part of that. So having systems in place, having things that you like to do, things that keep your day going. When it's the holiday time, there's a lot of travel happening. You might have visiting relatives, you might go be visiting people, you might be out of your comfort zone. And sometimes that could be really recharging, but sometimes that could be really exhausting. So having things that are familiar and comforting parts of your routine that you can take anywhere. Like, for example, maybe it's getting coffee and a certain snack with you.
Totally. I wish during these like family trips I would have been able to bring my safe foods because there are significant like dietary differences. Like I've been vegetarian since I was 12 and vegetarian in Nebraska almost 20 years ago wasn't really a thing. And so I didn't have a lot of food to choose from. And so that was always, I think one of my routines is like I like being adventurous with food, but I also need to have the safe food on hand at
I am,
it's that inner conflict of the ADHD and the autism
yeah.
push and pull. The ADHD wants to try fun foods, the autism wants the safe foods.
So yeah, I think knowing foods, especially like nowadays, it's so much easier. It's easy to find foods that are vegetarian that other people enjoy. And then it's something that's familiar and comforting to you that you can share with people. And then the dialogue comes around sharing common things. And that could be a good way to manage some of that routine change while also keeping some comfort and familiarity.
My family, when they'd cook holiday meals, they're catering, right, to like 40 some odd people in one house. And it was me and my mom who were vegetarian. There were only two of us, right? So there weren't a lot of options. And so we'd end up having to go to Denny's because that was the only thing that would be open on like Thanksgiving Day.
Oh yeah.
And there was nothing on the menu that was vegetarian. So I'd be like, can I have a salad with no chicken? And I still remember like this waitress being like, well, do you want like steak? I'm like, no, no, no. Do you want shrimp? I'm like, no, no, no. Like just nothing on it. And she's like, it's not going to be cheaper, right? And so there was just this like,
Yeah. It's so awkward, right? Like people don't understand. It's like I've been in that exact situation.
it's growing. It's getting better. Fun fact, vegetarianism is significantly more common in the autistic population than the common
Oh wow.
population. Yeah. So I think that even these struggles are probably relatable to some of our listeners.
Yeah. Something that I like to do in terms of routine change that I can control if I'm traveling is my bedtime routine. That one is so important because sleep is so important, especially with ADHD. Sleep is so important because when you don't get enough sleep, the symptoms the next day on lack of sleep are so much worse. For me, whether or not I take my medication, if I don't sleep well, I'm just a mess. So having a good sleep routine at home, I have a sleep routine. I have the kids, so after we get them to bed, we try to start winding our nights down. And it can be little things like that wherever you are that help you prepare for rest and winding down, especially if you're like in a different time zone. Having simple things like taking a shower and brushing your teeth and getting out pajamas, all of that sounds trivial, but having that part of your routine and that kind of consistency, whether it's reading a book or going through the motions of it, can be really comforting and really good. Because I've been in situations before where I don't have that, and especially when you're trying to meet people or hanging out with people, and it's just like drinking all night. That's pretty much the recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say to build on that is coming up with condensed bedtime routines. Because
Yeah,
sometimes when I'm traveling, I'm like, I'm going to keep my whole routine. And then of course, it's extra challenging as well. It's extra important and extra challenging at the same time. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm the expert here. Like I have an atrocious sleep routine and sleep habits for my entire life, but I've come up with ways to sometimes collapse it. So for example, flossing my teeth takes a really long time. And I'm like, I gotta do it, I gotta do it. But like if it gets past a certain point, it is more important to get to bed. My teeth can wait. I can
yeah,
floss tomorrow, whatever. I'm just gonna brush them. Or like, you know what? So this is a weird kind of, I think it's like a texture sensory thing. Sometimes I just cannot bring myself to wash my face. It's
yeah,
really hard for me. And so I at one point found my cellar water, I think it's called. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Where you can just like wipe your face with a towel and that type of water to get stuff off, which again is it's better, right? But sometimes I'm even like, I
yeah,
can't do that. And I'm like, you know what? If you don't wash your face tonight, it is not the end of the world. Like you need to go to bed.
totally.
Because it might take myself 20 minutes to hype, it might take me 20 minutes to hype myself up to do it. And like it's not worth the trade-off. Like the sleep is more important. So I think finding ways to also collapse your routine, even if it's not the full routine while you're traveling, is great because the sleep itself is the most important part there.
Yeah, that's totally true. I like what you're saying about the wipes. That reminded me of when I travel, sometimes I'll have a little like kit that has like it's like face wipes and then spray. It's like a misting spray that just freshens you
Mhm.
up when you're on the plane or even when you get off the plane or you're transitioning from a hotel. Just have a little misting spray and like the just like wipes to wipe your face down and a clean change of clothes. Sometimes that is all it takes, and it's a good way to stay comfortable and kind of reset.
I even saw a video on YouTube of a woman who is autistic, and sometimes when she can't bring herself to do showers, because that is a very common problem
Yeah.
for autistic folks. Like the showers are a lot of sensory changes at once. It's
Mm-hmm.
the temperature change, it's feeling wet, it's the feeling of the water on your skin, getting out of the shower. Like there's so many steps to it that can be challenging for people. But when she can't shower, she uses baby wipes on her body. It's like, hey, it works. And I know some people might be worried about the environment too, like, because I think we are in general a fairly conscientious group, but a couple baby wipes is not gonna be the end of the world, right?
Totally. I read that in How to Keep House While Drowning, which is a great book that talks about some of that stuff. And when she talks about the environment a little bit, her thing, the way she puts it is you have to take care of yourself first because you'll be able to make bigger bigger positive impacts on the environment if you are yourself healthy in a place where you can do that. If you're struggling, then trying to save the environment is not going to help the environment or yourself in those moments. It will just add additional pressure and stress and overwhelm. And she talks a little bit about the ableism involved in that, because when you visit medical facilities, there is a lot of like waste from a medical perspective, and it's okay if you're throwing out rubber gloves and like syringes and all that because you're caring for people. You have to have that same amount of kindness for yourself. If you need an accommodation, it's not going to be the end of the world in order to make yourself a better living, contributing person to the society. Then you can actually give back in much greater ways on the days when you do feel better, you feel 100%. The other thing she talks about is the little, like, what do they call, like the wisps, the little like toothpick brushes. Those are awesome for traveling and great just to kind of have around, like disposable toothbrushes or like the little like pre-toothpaste toothbrushes. They're great because they can give you that clean feeling without having to go through the whole motion of the overwhelming sensations of brushing your teeth.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point because I went through a phase, I don't know, a number of years ago where I was like, I want to eliminate plastic from my routine. And I tried to do it all. Like this was where the rigidity, the kind of rigid mindset came into play. Like I was like, I'm going to do it with every single product, everything that I do. And it just became like absolutely crippling. Like I couldn't, I got stuck and overwhelmed, and it really took a huge toll on my mental health. And it took a long time to dig myself out, to the point where my therapist was trying to do like exposure therapy. And you're going to go into a bathroom, and instead of using the hand dryer, you're going to use a paper towel on purpose. And like that just
Wow.
made
Yeah.
me feel sick at the time, the idea
Yeah.
of doing that. But I've pulled out of that now, and I've learned to have a lot more grace with myself. Like, hey, if I do, especially if I'm having a rough day where I'm less able to do things and I need to use disposable products, like it's okay. It's okay to do
Totally.
that.
Totally. And I've got kids. So when you have kids, it's tough. I want to give them good values, but it's tough to save the environment when you're struggling on your own. And then you've got kids, you just got to give yourself a little bit of grace, because while the environment is important and we should all be doing our part to conserve and reduce waste, you're not going to save the planet on your own. And a couple of days of comfort are not going to destroy the planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk about overwhelm now and how overwhelming the holidays can be. The sensory overload that comes with it, just from the constant Christmas music you hear everywhere, the happy, sometimes like artificial, joyful attitudes, the bright lights, and how important it is to set boundaries with people when you're in some of these overwhelming places, especially when you're at parties or visiting people, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. So being able to let people know when you need space, that you need space, finding a quiet room or taking a walk just to get away or reset. Taking space is okay. Setting boundaries is okay. It's not something that you need to apologize for. Taking a break is totally fine. And if things get overwhelming and if you are dealing with overstimulation, having a way to step away and get out of that can be really, really beneficial.
Yeah, and I would add on another step to that is to be intentionally more in touch with your body than usual so that you're able to step away before the point of like a meltdown or a shutdown, because we already know that you're probably at higher risk of hitting that breaking point in this type of environment. And I know it's challenging. A lot of us um, tend to not have sort of inward focus. A lot of us tend to not be as aware of our bodies and our sensations. And so, gosh, even if you have to like set a physical timer on your phone, like every 20 minutes, I'm gonna check in with my body and see like, are my arms clenched? Does my throat hurt? Does my stomach hurt? Like doing a sort of manual check-in like that, I think
Do
can
you
be.
have to pee?
Do you have to pee? Am I hungry? When's the last time I drank
Totally.
some water? Even if
Yeah,
listening to us say these steps right now, like type it on your phone, make a note or something can help so that you can know when to remove yourself or take care of bodily functions before they get to the point of emergency. Because your body will tell you when it's a crisis. Your body will,
absolutely.
you haven't drank water in 10 hours. Your head's
Yeah.
really bad now. So trying to catch it before is ideal.
I like that setting a timer to check in with yourself. That's a good one.
Yeah. You're not going to remember in the moment.
Yeah.
Especially all of us time blind folks out there. So if you need external structure to do so, use that external structure.
Yeah. So as we think about overwhelm and sensory overload and overstimulation, Tara, I'm wondering about some of the science behind the sensory issues. Do you know a little bit about that? Can you talk a little bit about the science behind the sensory overwhelm?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, so there is a scientific reason for why a lot of us feel sensory overload, and it has to do with your neurotransmitters. So in the last episode, might have been the bonus mini episode, we talked about neurotransmitters in the brain and how they're used to send messages. Well, there's two very special neurotransmitters, and those are GABA and glutamate. And those are the technical term, they're excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. So, what this is saying is they are the red light and the green light in your brain. They tell your other neurons when to stop and when to fire. And so these have to be in the right balance. So, if we think about the brain as being like a network of roads, right? You would never want any of them to have the green light on all the time because that would mess up traffic flow. You wouldn't want any of them to have a red light on all the time. You need those to be switching on and off in the correct balance. Well, so the theory goes, what they've been finding is that particularly folks with autism tend to have an imbalance between GABA and glutamate. So it's either too much glutamate, glutamate is like the green light, or too little GABA, which is the red light. And so when those are out of balance in that way, you end up getting neurons firing more frequently. And so the neurons in your brain are firing all the time, like a lot more than other people. And so that's why you actually experience sensations in a more intense way. Everybody feels like a wool sweater is kind of scratchy, but like you feel it more if your neurons are firing more because they're not signaling to your brain scratchy. They're signaling to your brain scratchy, 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 scratchy,
Yeah.
scratchy.
Does that explain why I can never settle on one outfit? I have to like go through 3 or 4 pairs of clothes until I find the perfect comfortable shirt.
I mean, speaking of traveling, I always have to bring giant suitcases because a shirt that feels good today might not feel good tomorrow. And so I have to have like 10 different combinations of clothes to make sure that on the day in question when I'm on a trip, I will have something that feels good to wear. So yeah.
God, so you just made me realize that I do that too. I didn't even realize that it
Mhm.
was because of sensory and stimulation. I'll pack multiple. I have a lot of just in case outfits because
Mhm.
it has
Mhm.
to be. I have to be comfortable, and I cannot predict how that is going to feel when I'm in the environment and I'm sensitive to the temperature or the weather or like the dry air. Any of that will change the way the clothes feel.
I was just about to say temperature is a huge one. Like you
Yeah,
need like the most precise clothing to deal with the temperature if you're really sensitive to changes. Yeah, sensory issues
totally.
are one of those things where like the more you dig, the more you realize like there are so many almost like hidden sensory issues, like things that you've been coping with your entire life.
Yeah.
And I don't mean hidden to say that they aren't impactful, because they are. They're tremendously impactful. It's just the word sensory issue might not seem like the right descriptor. And then you realize like, oh yeah, this is a sensory issue. So this is what's happening is your neurons are firing more frequently. And the sort of extreme example of this is actually epilepsy. So when your neurons are firing way too much, that can lead to seizures. And so if you look at the medication that gets prescribed, one of them for epilepsy is gabapentin, which isn't GABA in its raw form, because pure GABAs can't actually cross the blood-brain barrier. So basically that means like if you swallow GABA, it's not going to make it to your brain. But gabapentin is a medication that is a form that is basically just more GABA for the brain to use. So it's raising the GABA level to decrease the frequency with which your neurons fire. And that's what they use for epilepsy. But yeah, sensory issues are just like feeling the thing. It's not that other people don't like have texture preferences or heat preferences or things. It's just they don't feel it as deeply, intensely. Like the light doesn't burn their eyes. Light is a really big one for me. If I'm sitting at a table and there's a candle, just a single tea light, that light feels like it's searing into my brain and I can't focus on anything else until I blow out the candle. Or sometimes with like the electric candles, those drive me nuts. I'll have to like cover it with my water glass so that it's not like beaming into my eye, because it just hurts so freaking bad. Oh my God.
Yeah. I don't know if this is true, but I feel like my medication makes me more sensitive to light. I've just noticed like sometimes when I'm taking my medication, I feel like the sun feels brighter, or like lights feel brighter. And I'll wear like blue light blocking glasses while I'm working, because I think that helps a little bit.
Yeah, ADHD meds are definitely known to increase sensory issues.
Yeah.
That is for sure a side effect.
Cool. So is that all we've got for our holiday episode?
I think so. To all our listeners, I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season, however you choose to celebrate or not celebrate. Like maybe the holidays are not for you. But either way, have a wonderful time, and hopefully these tips were helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know. Let us know if there's anything we missed or anything you do to cope with the holidays.
Please share. We might use some of them ourselves.
Cool. Stay safe. Take care. Happy holidays.